Okay, I would like to call this Planning Board public meeting to order. It's Tuesday, February 15, 2021. We're in the Village Hall courtroom. It's approximately 7:32 p.m. right now.
In accordance with the provisions of Section 10:4/8D of the Open Public Meetings Act, the date, location, and time of the commencement of this meeting is reflected in a meeting notice, a copy of which schedule has been filed with the village manager and the village clerk, the Ridgewood News and the Record newspapers, and posted on the bulletin board in the entry lobby of the village municipal offices at 131 North Maple Avenue and on the village website, all in accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Jane.
Mayor Knudsen? Here. John Young?
Here.
Councilman Reynolds? Here. Richard Joel?
Here.
Diane O'Brien?
Here.
Debbie Patiri? Melanie Huban? Fran Bardo?
Here.
Darlene Johnson? Igor Labarsky?
Here.
Sergio Allegra?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum and can proceed. Do we have any public comments on topics not pending before the board? If anyone would like to speak, you can come up to lectern, state your name, and then make a comment. Okay, seeing there none, we'll move on to the next items. Next item is committee, commission, professional updates for non-agenda topics. Do we have any updates from anyone to my right?
All right, I'll do HPC. Historic Preservation Commission met Thursday evening. The commission reviewed a number of applications, including one for a new store, Envy by Melissa Gorga, located at 7 East Ridgewood Ave. This is the old Jekyll and Hyde building. It will be painted all white and with some gold trim lettering. Phytometry, which will be at the old New York Sports Club, Fells Residence, which was an application prior to going to the Board of Adjustment for an addition to a historic property. Borrow Baby at 80 East Ridgewood Avenue. Bali Salon, and I think nobody came for the Zielinski House. And then afterwards, Diane O'Brien reviewed the historic element for the master plan.
Okay, do we have any reports to my left? Okay. Jane, have we received any correspondence? Okay. All right, number 4 on the agenda is Phase 2 Master Plan Public Meeting. And we're going to have John Barry from Higher Gruel, who's the planner for the Master Plan Phase 2. I'll give you the floor, John.
Can everybody hear me? Is this all right? Okay. So this is our third meeting on the second phase of the master plan, which is following up from the visioning process that was conducted over the last couple of years. See some familiar faces in the audience. Welcome back. Thank you for your continued interest. What we're hoping to do this evening is to present to you some of the initial recommendations that we've come up with. These are all recommendations that are still a little bit up in the air. We haven't finalized anything yet. Nothing this evening will be adopted or formally acted on. We're just at that stage in the process where we're starting to get down to the things that we'll recommend and be fleshed out and included in the final master plan. Can I take my mask off? Is that acceptable?
You're okay.
I'll stay back here.
A way to turn up the volume.
So
John, just
better?
keep your voice up so we can have a record of what you say, please.
Sure. Is there more volume available?
Only by you.
Only by me. All right. I may not make it through, but I'll do my best. Can you hear? Can we hear in the back? Yes. Okay. So as I was saying, these are the draft recommendations that we'll be continuing
John,
to
can we
flesh.
just hold up for a sec? We'll just let them get chairs over there so they can
Sure.
sit down. Sorry about that.
Does Barbara need help getting a chair? Where's Barbara? Did-
Okay.
I'll get her. Just ask Barbara if she wants a chair. Thank you. Barbara, we're going to get Barbara a chair, okay? Oh, somebody did? Oh, so sweet. Oop, okay. There we go.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. And thank you for everyone being here, too.
Sure.
We appreciate it.
Okay, so as I said, we are in the process of working through these draft recommendations. We're giving everyone this evening a chance to hear about what we've been up to, offer comments, ask questions, and of course the board will offer their input as well. The next steps from here are to really take and refine our recommendations, continue to flesh out the document, and then when we're back before you again, it'll be to present the draft of the master plan. And so that'll be our final checkpoint before we move toward the ultimate adoption of the master plan. So that'll happen, we're looking at the next couple months, likely the beginning of April we'll have the draft presentation, and then hopefully beginning of May we'll have the final presentation. So just we'll continue to announce those updates and the notice, of course, of the public meetings. So we're going to run through, we're going to begin with the downtown element this evening, then we'll talk about land use, circulation, and then we'll go into the sustainability, utilities, community facilities, and recycling and historic preservation elements. We're going to do it a little bit differently than we have in the past. We're going to break up the presentation a little bit to give some time for discussion in between so that it's not so much all at once, break things up a little bit. And hopefully that'll make it more interactive and keep the material fresh. So to begin with, I know there's a lot of text on these initial slides. We tried to keep it to a minimum as we move forward. But for the downtown economic development element, we've taken goals that came out of the visioning process and started to flesh out recommendations that applied to these different goals. Maintaining the aesthetic downtown, what you like about Ridgewood today, limiting further high-density residential development. So we've seen the new buildings that have come online, and now that will strike a balance and not see too much more of that. Promoting a greater variety of retail types, so looking at different kinds of uses that may be beneficial downtown. Creating a mix of complementary uses. We're looking at a lot of different trends in terms of commuting and work and office space, so there may be more of an opportunity to have more of a daytime population downtown moving forward. Customer-friendly, customer-focused downtown, making it a place that people want to come, a place where people are aware of what's going on, attractive coming downtown. Creating a safe environment for pedestrians, for everyone of all ages and physical abilities. Looking at alternatives to car traffic, keeping safe pedestrian spaces, reducing congestion, promoting other forms of transportation. And then making sure that there's strong communication, advertising, and a sense of community. People in town know what's going on downtown and want to come downtown and experience those things. In our poll questions that some of you may have participated in, we had a question focused on uses downtown, what things you would like to see. Now, our most common answer was hardware store, which I know there had been one downtown in the past. Some of these things there are macroeconomic forces at play that make certain businesses more viable than others, but trying to attract a mix of arts and performance uses, food and drink, we have plenty of, but there's always room for a good restaurant. Places that are child-friendly, family-friendly, places that appeal to a wide range of ages. So just trying to get that big mix of things that has something for everyone. So in terms of some of the land uses that we may recommend zoning ordinance changes to allow for these land uses that aren't today, or to clarify certain uses. Things that aren't, you don't have downtown right now. Microbreweries, microdistilleries, those kinds of uses have been popping up all over the state. They've become very much the fabric of a lot of different towns as centers of activity. Different kinds of recreational venues, things like arcades, axe throwing, things like that have become kind of popular niche things, and there's always an evolution and new versions of that coming, but a catch-all recreational type venue may be an appropriate use. You have Serendipity Labs, which is an example of a co-working space, flexible office kind of space, looking at more of that model as we are uncertain about the future of commuting, people going to big offices in New York, trying to promote more office space downtown in different forms. Boutique hotels, bed and breakfasts, perhaps. And then looking at flexibility, temporary uses and pop-ups where you have a big storefront and you may not have a tenant for a big storefront, but you may have a lot of little tenants that could occupy spaces and have them rotate and have seasonal things. Looking to build that flexibility so you don't have these long-term vacancies or periods of inactivity along key corridors. Other land use recommendations not related to use, dealing with aesthetics, requirements to have displays in storefronts that during periods of transition and vacancy, improving some of the aesthetic conditions underneath the railroad tracks through lighting, art installations, murals, things like that. Greening downtown, we'll talk a little bit about trees in a couple of these different sections, but continuing to promote vegetation, landscaping, new trees. And then looking at some of the key opportunity areas. We have Van Ness Square as a major focal point. But as I was saying to some folks earlier, as someone who's not in Ridgewood every day, but when you walk down Ridgewood Avenue, it kind of looms above you. It's not right there, it's not right there with you because of the elevation change. It's physically set up higher. The area where it's at grade is really on the west side of it at Van Ness Square, the street by the bus terminal. So thinking about how that can become a bit more of a focal point and how it can relate to its surroundings. And then the bus terminal building itself, whether that has a future as a kiosk or a small vendor space, something like that to bring activity and to keep it maintained. So just some kind of precedent imagery, potential ideas that relate to those spaces potentially. And then another key site in town, the area, the North Walnut redevelopment area, corner of Franklin and North Walnut, and the Old Town Garage site, what will become of that property and how that space can potentially beautify the Franklin Avenue corridor, create a gathering space, a pedestrian-friendly space, and it could look something like this as just a general concept. And then broadly downtown, continuing to build a brand, an aesthetic, information where people identify a certain thing with Ridgewood. Potentially a special improvement district or business improvement district is a tool that's been used in downtowns to really formalize a cohesive effort to bring together that branding, marketing, events, beautification, all the different things that make downtowns special places. As more and more technology becomes available, digital tools like kiosks or apps that can direct people, that can identify stores that are having special events, special sales, those kinds of things, and integrating that with your parking so that when you park, you know where you're going and how to get back. With that, I'm going to turn over to talk a little bit about circulation downtown.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about just the downtown element from the circulation perspective. So having a train station.
You have to talk much louder.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry.
Hold it real close.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Having a train station in the heart of Ridgewood is one of the village's key assets. And we can support and enhance that asset by organizing the flow of people, cars, cyclists, and improving access to mass transit, and that's bus and rail. The focus should be on developing ways to get residents and visitors to the train station through alternative modes to reduce car dependency. So what I'm going to do is on some of these slides, I'm going to focus on a couple of goals and not all of them, recommendations, and these will be available at a later time, as John mentioned. So consider reorganizing the train station into a transit hub with access to bus and rail. That can help sort of organize the flow of people, cars, and buses. Consider a jitney, that can, during peak hours, that can get residents from different neighborhoods to the train station. That will help reduce traffic in the downtown. With regards to creating, so having a downtown in Ridgewood is not only an asset for the village, but it's also a regional downtown. Not many surrounding towns have a downtown there. Making sure that the downtown is a welcoming, aesthetically pleasing place should be one of the key goals. Some of the recommendations here that we wanted to focus on are conducting multi-year studies that look at the impact of parking in the downtown. We have a new garage. We have the pandemic that has permanently changed the way people go to work and work. So looking at some of that will help us identify the needs for parking. Also creative wayfinding. A lot of people, the parking garage is pretty new, and a lot of people that are new to town may not even know that it's there. And so, that's one of the things that you can highlight with wayfinding signs. Some of the other recommendations that we wanted to focus on. So ensuring that the downtown is a place for all users, for cyclists, pedestrians. What we want to do, one of the ways to do that is to consider making some of the streets one-way streets, and that would allow providing wider sidewalks and bicycle infrastructure without the loss of parking, because as we understand that parking is a key asset in the downtown. Focusing on parking and loading and delivery. As I said, parking is an important resource for the downtown, and it is crucial for businesses, but it should be accommodated in a way that's efficient, and it encourages activity and convenience, but also minimizes traffic and circulation impacts for other users. Some of our recommendations are adopting a curbside management policy that helps the village determine how to use the curb. The curb is a high-value real estate space, so you want to use it for ride-sharing, for loading, for parking, and just having a policy will help streamline that process. And also consider an ongoing parking inventory and study that I mentioned earlier that would help determine what is the true need for parking in the downtown going forward, given the pandemic and the garage and the new development. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to talk about the downtown recommendations. We have 10 minutes, and we have our a trusty bicycle bell that we're going to use at the end of the 10 minutes.
Thank you all. We'll start with the board, and if anybody has any questions or comments on this section, and then hopefully give a few opportunities.
Okay. Does anyone from the board have any questions? No? Okay. Any of our professionals have questions? Okay, we're going to open it up to the public then. If someone wants to come up, just state your name. Come up to the lectern here. Just state your name and address, and then you can ask questions of John or Roshana.
Nancy Brennan Hill, 136 Doremus Avenue, Ridgewood. I really like some of the ideas about changing the train station to maybe be a multiple hub, to making that beautiful park more accessible, thinking about different types of businesses that could be in Ridgewood. But I don't understand, like, these are all good ideas, but how does it move from where we are now to get there? How do you actually get there?
So this is one step in that process. right? The master plan is a guide, it's the vision for the town. It is not in itself a law or in itself going to implement those things, but those recommendations will then hopefully get support and then be able to be enacted through different steps later on. Some cases there may be studies that need to happen before you understand the way forward. The general recommendation may spur a study that spurs a design, that spurs an action. It's the first step in a multi-step process. A lot of times if you're applying for grant funding, the idea, if you have the concept in your master plan, that's a point in your favor, depending on where the funding's coming from. And like I said, it's what the vision to move forward is over the next decade or more, and hopefully there's the follow-through that happens to implement these ideas.
Rorick, Hallaby, 1 Franklin Avenue. Your number 2 recommendation is to limit high-density development. The question is, why? If the market demands more high-density developments, and the 3 apartments that were built, that were fought tooth and nail, basically were probably the best thing that has happened to Ridgewood in the last 15 years, replacing these rundown, miserable, boarded up car dealerships. Now, the 2 points I have basically that's missing, while you're being very specific, and I appreciate specificity for good ideas, what we need in Ridgewood basically is good, honest governance that will allow the town to thrive on its own. We need to encourage the market to determine what it is the central business district should have. Talking about a hardware store, I'd love to have a hardware store. But you know something? That will probably last like 3 months, be out of business. So I even talk about it. Let the market determine what it is. So why not allow the merchants to determine the future of the central business district within certain constraints? For people to sit and say, I want this, I want that, totally unrelated to what the market needs, is a recipe for disaster. So don't be too specific. Secondly, I need to see more in the master plan about good governance, about getting people to participate in the political process, about being transparent in what you do. That's what we need. And then let the market, to a great extent, determine what it is the central business district will look like. Thank you.
Good evening. Hunter Lehman, 234 Union Street. I was interested in what I see as a continued emphasis on motor vehicle traffic in the downtown area. And I think, so I kind of base this, I have 3 children. 2 are in their 30s, 1 is 50. Of the 3 of them, only 1 has a car. The other 2 don't even care to own a car. And I think what we see with the pandemic is that there's a significant change in how people operate. And it's not with a motor vehicle. So I would maybe make the suggestion that you turn down the volume on motor vehicle traffic a little bit and emphasize more bicycle and pedestrian traffic. It would be great if the downtown area was a walking area entirely for blocks. Thank you.
Thank you. And in fact, the majority of the recommendations that we're looking at, and Rashna can chime in as well, are focused on making downtown and the village in general safer and friendlier for pedestrians and cyclists. Cars have their space, and we're trying to strike a balance and figure out how to create more opportunity for other modes of transportation as well.
I just wanted to add a comment, and it's to a point made by one of our residents. This presentation, the foundation for this presentation, is the visioning process that was a survey of thousands of Ridgewood residents. So it's not anyone creating directives about what kind of, anyone up here or on the village council saying we want this or we want that. This is an outreach, a public outreach that is the foundation for this presentation. Maybe you want to elaborate on that a little, because I don't want anyone to think that this is a directive coming from here or somebody unknown, that this is a collective effort, a public outreach. It's a community document.
Absolutely. And so there was the extensive vision process that was done, which has formed the backbone for what we are doing now. We've had a couple of these meetings. We've had some poll questions that we posted, things like that. We're combining all of the input that we've gotten, all of what we've heard from everybody throughout the whole process with best practices, examples of things that have been done elsewhere, our personal experience and knowledge as professionals, and that's all coming together into this document. So in terms of the specificity of certain things, it's not meant to say that any one thing is going to necessarily happen as a result of this. There are many other forces at play, including private enterprise when it comes to businesses. What we can do is put the tools in place, lay the foundation where those things can happen in terms of whether it's public or private investment. So that's what the master plan does. That's what our role here is. We have time for one or two more before we move on.
Good evening, Sheila Brogan, 302 Kensington Drive in Ridgewood. Just so I'm clear on this, because sitting on the safety committee, we've had years of conversations about whether, in fact, we could do any one-way streets in the CBD, and also bike lanes. How do we get kids riding bikes off the sidewalks and into a safer lanes? So if this is in the master plan, what's the process to move it forward? Or if those were things, how does the whole process work? Am I going beyond where we need to go right now?
Yeah, no.
Oh, is that okay?
Can you hear me? So the master plan, the recommendations in the master plan are meant to echo what the village wants and what we found through our data analysis. The next step to getting some of these recommendations implemented would be to, for example, for the one-way street, since you brought that up, you would conduct a study to see the feasibility of that one-way street. And part of our document, we are going to provide a list of funding sources that can provide, grants to the village to conduct such studies. And in general, for overall improvement of bicycle and pedestrian network in the village, you would prepare a complete streets plan. And that would look at the entire village and identify street by street what kind of facility type would go, for example, for bicycles, and where the gaps are for sidewalks and such pedestrian connections. So that's how you would take it to the next level. So this is just meant to be a vision for what everyone wants. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna.
There's another question.
One more. Sorry, last one for this round, and we're gonna move on. We'll have a couple more times for everybody to talk.
I didn't hear the bicycle.
Quickie. Very interesting. Fred Jubitz, 56 Hermann's Place, Ridgewood. I was always taken aback when my daughter went to school in Boulder, Colorado, how they created a very pedestrian-friendly downtown, but they also allowed for some larger-scale development. But when they did so, they required underground parking if that were to ever happen. I'm not saying it should, but if it were to. Has anything like that ever been considered by your, I guess, committee? You know, if there were to be some sort of higher density kind of development, that it has underground parking, which allows for street, you know, for stores to be on the street and keeps a friendly environment in place.
So, as we heard, the recommendations are not necessarily to encourage any more high-density development at this time. The challenge there is frankly cost. I mean, it's enormously expensive to construct underground parking, and I would wager that the excavation here would probably be a real challenge based on what little I know about the soil. But it's a good point in terms of activating the street frontage. But you do see with the new development on Franklin, there are storefronts along that development. The parking's set behind the building. It's not underground, but they're not active yet. They're still waiting to get leased up, which is not uncommon for new space. But there will be activity. There will be activity in those storefronts at some point. So the goal is to always have an active streetscape, an active street presence. You want to limit dead space, whether it's parking or otherwise. Some buildings have large dead facades, and we want to try and limit that and break those up as much as possible, any downtown. Okay, so we're going to move on and discuss the land use element and the circulation element, which have overlap with downtown. There's, the downtown is really, we chose to put that first because it's tied in all together, but it's also the focus of the village. So otherwise, moving forward in the land use element, we have a set of goals, again, that came from the visioning process in terms of trying to balance this idea of a small town and a village feel, but also with the reality that there are changing demands, there are changing market forces and so we want to understand how the village can move forward with a balance of the old and the new. Being proactive in community planning matters. This master plan process and what will come from it, hopefully we'll maintain that. Planning for the needs of current residents while also understanding the needs and preferences of newer and future residents. Encouraging a mix of housing types that provides for continuity through the life cycle, through your experience in Ridgewood, as young people starting out, as people with families, as older people who are empty nesters, providing that range of housing opportunities so that there's something for everybody to be able to stay and live and grow in Ridgewood. Maintaining the quality of downtown, we talked about limiting the high-density residential development and looking at a more context-sensitive development to the extent that there is new residential. Reducing impacts of tear-downs, construction of larger homes, kind of maintaining that balance in the housing stock. Planning ahead for the reuse of houses of worship. This is something that a lot of towns have to think about. Protecting and enhancing the tree canopy. Landscaping is very important, trees are very important. And then looking at vulnerabilities to climate change, flooding, resiliency, and how the village can become more resilient and more sustainable moving forward. Some of the basic land use nuts and bolts kind of zoning recommendations that don't really lend themselves to pretty pictures but warrant further investigation. Looking at the residential zones in town today, there's a lot of mismatch between the minimum lot size requirements and what actually exists out there on the ground in terms of how lots are laid out. There may not be a clean solution because there is a wide variety of lot sizes, but it may be appropriate to look at those standards, adjust some of the requirements, perhaps create an additional zone if needed, so that there's a better alignment between the bulk standards, things that govern the size of buildings, and the size of lots that exist in Ridgewood. Looking at, there are a number of parcels kind of around the fringe of downtown mostly that are split between multiple zones. There was a recommendation in the previous master plan reexamination report to consider flipping those into one zone or the other. It's not something that's been undertaken yet, but continuing to look at that is worthwhile. And then there's a couple of zones that are small and may or may not be serving a purpose today. It may be worth looking at eliminating those or reestablishing the standards in those. terms of design standards, a couple of the key things we want to think about are lighting standards. There's, most new lighting is LEDs now, and there's a wide range of temperature, and when I talk about temperature, really the color of the light. So the ordinance right now is basically silent on that issue, but you get a lot of white, bright LED lights that are trending toward the blue end of the spectrum, and that can be an uncomfortable, they have their purpose. You know, certain areas are, that's where you want, what you want, but in more residential neighborhoods and more in town, you may not want that harsh bright light, so looking at those kinds of standards. Dark sky standards to limit up glare and out glare. So just looking at expanding a little bit on what we have today. With landscaping, tree plantings, I'll get a little more into specifics on trees, but making sure that native plants are, if not required, absolutely prioritized. A ban on invasive species or species that are subject to blights so that you're not planting trees or plants that are going to be a problem. And then prioritizing lower maintenance and more resilient plants that can be habitat, pollinator habitat and animal habitat, and will require less fertilizer, less maintenance, less water. And then just making sure that we are aligned on the historic preservation guidelines that may come out of the historic preservation element. So we talked about a lot of the uses already in the context of downtown. One of the other recommendations is talking about the places of worship. And you know, there's been kind of a long-term trend, and I saw the other day that in the Gallup polling that's been done, that for the first time ever, and the first time certainly since they've been doing this polling for about 70 or 80 years, fewer than half the people in this country describe themselves as affiliated with any religious group or regularly attend religious service. So congregations, parishes are shrinking, and large buildings may have a future as something other than a church. You may need a smaller building, you may consolidate different parishes. So thinking about what to do with these buildings that are often iconic, important buildings in town, and how those can go on to a second life. We talked about residential flexibility in terms of kind of the life cycle of people's housing needs, and thinking about options and opportunities. You know, these are meant to kind of stimulate thought and may warrant further study. Nothing's being set in stone, but context is important. And the idea of a home that looks in every way like a single family home, but maybe designed to have several units in it, as is the one in the upper right corner. That's a four-unit building built in Portland, Oregon. Looks like a single family home, but it's been designed and is contextual in such a way that that appears like a single family home. Looking at different options for senior housing, making sure everything's on one floor, having accessibility. You know, there's a lot of hills in Ridgewood, so making sure that there's opportunities for people with mobility challenges. Supportive housing, special needs housing, considering different models potentially for accessory dwelling units moving forward. There's a lot of trends, there's a lot of scholarship on this. There's some proof of concept in other towns in New Jersey that have taken a plunge on that. So with conditions, with standards, there may be an appropriate way to put that into place in parts of Ridgewood. As far as tree plantings go, requiring specific standards throughout the development ordinance for tree plantings beyond what's already there, expanding on that. Looking at a tree replacement requirement, tree permits for taking down trees even on private property right now. That's not in place, so, and not just a one-for-one replacement, that if you have a large tree, large specimen trees, that may warrant a multiple replacement. A lot of times the on-site planting may not happen, so you'd have to establish a tree fund that could be an in-lieu contribution, and then that money can be allocated through a plan to replace trees elsewhere in town for maintenance and the kinds of things you need to steadily maintain your tree canopy and make sure that it grows and doesn't decay. For storm resiliency, the village has been doing a great job in terms of the community rating system, the insurance and the National Flood Insurance Program for maintaining a discount for people with flood insurance, but that's really the symptom of all of the, or the outcome of all of the activity that goes on behind the scenes. So there's a lot of work that goes into getting to that level and maintaining that level. It may not be feasible to get higher in the short term, but continuing to maintain that level is certainly a big accomplishment. Continuing to look at higher standards for development within the flood hazard area may include expanding out the flood elevation requirements into the 500-year floodplain, which now is becoming maybe more like the 100-year floodplain, while the 100-year floodplain is more like the 10-year floodplain or the 2-year floodplain. So thinking about some of those higher standards, incorporating more extensive green infrastructure, and some of those projects are already underway, but throughout public and private development. Some examples on the screen here. You've got what the Resiliency Park in Hoboken. It's a functional space, but it's functional as a recreational space, as a community gathering space. It's also functional as a stormwater management space. There's a lot of underground storage below that green and gray. And then continuing to pursue some of the mitigation and response activities that are outlined in the county's hazard mitigation plan, working with neighboring towns to the extent that it makes sense on response efforts, on planning in a larger scale, watershed-based scale, considering developing, continuing to build out the emergency management infrastructure in town. We'll talk a little bit about that in the community facilities section as well. And making sure that information is disseminated, that people know where to go, that people understand the risks. And I know that that's already being done, but just reinforcing that and continuing to improve that communication. Now I'm going to pass it along to the circulation element.
So the circulation element, can everybody hear me okay? I have a pretty loud voice. It's concerned with the location and the types of facilities for all modes of transportation. They're required to move people and goods through and about the municipality. So the transportation infrastructure, the streets and sidewalk network, they connect and provide access to every destination, obviously, and therefore they're implicated in the success of every element. So even though it's not officially required by law, it is an important element, and we have great support for many of the things that you've already heard in the land use element and the downtown element. So we are guided by the general concepts that were developed through the 2-year process of Section 1 of the vision plan. And these were the 3 concepts that were, that rose to the top, and they're very closely related. Considering ways to reduce the vehicle traffic and the need for parking, make streets safer to support and promote walking and bicycling, and improving pedestrian connections between places within the village. Those are our overarching goals for circulation. Our findings and our recommendations are born of the vision plan, but also the outreach and analysis that we did, and a look at the previous plans. And what we concluded in our analysis and looking at previous plans is that Ridgewood is very well positioned to improve its walkability and bikeability because it already has a lot of strong components. It's got a lot of public support and government support as well. Ridgewood has a complete streets policy that it passed back in 2011, and its complete streets policy, which was mentioned before, is a commitment of the town to accommodate all modes, walking, biking, as well as freight, delivery, buses, transit, and all of the rest. But that is something that shows the commitment of the government, and it's something that you can continue to build on. And we know that walking and biking access to the schools and to the parks and trails is a community-wide priority. It isn't located in any one particular spot. And we've got a lot of opportunity for citizen engagement through the committee structure. So, one really important thing that is an asset that not a lot of people are familiar with is that the county, back in 2015, sponsored a study for biking and walking plans for all the towns in central Bergen County, which included, and actually NV5 was involved in doing that plan. So that was only a few years ago, and many of the recommendations are still relevant and on the table. So our outreach supports what we've already indicated. There are the top 3 findings that when we polled people was to improve the condition of roadways. That's the 31%. The second one is the congestion. That is a big issue throughout the town, especially the downtown. And the third is more bicycle access and safety. So they all kind of go together and support what we already found from our discussions with people. This draft map is a composite of the plans that we looked at, the high crash corridors and hot spots, and the input we got from people during polling. The purple dots are where people said it isn't, there are safety issues. And the red lines are also where there are safety issues. Well, they happen to correspond closely to the areas that were identified for improvement in the Bergen County bicycle and pedestrian plan. So that says that we're on to something. And we looked at the crash, and we did a crash analysis, and we looked at the crashes over the 2014 to 2018 or 19, and they correspond as well. So we have a really strong indication of what needs to be done and what could be done, and we've got a great platform to do it. So we have 9 goals for the circulation element. The first is vibrant, welcoming, and accessible downtown, which we've already discussed. And second goal is roadway safety. Oh, and the order of the goals isn't of particular importance, but they all help to together become a comprehensive approach. The third goal is complete and green streets policy. Let's make it work better for Ridgewood. Let's get, there's a lot of innovations in complete streets that we're going to talk about in terms of the recommendations, but that is an important goal. Developing a village-wide bicycle and pedestrian network that is continuous and comfortable and safe is important. Goal 5 is encouraging transit use, and that you do that by improving access to transit and addressing what are called the first and last mile improvements. And that means no one is going to walk or bike to the train station if it feels unsafe and if it's uncomfortable and along the way there's a break and it's difficult to cross. So you really need to look at the train station and look at the walking and biking that could happen and make sure that you've accommodated from the neighborhoods within that walk shed and bike shed. You have created an environment that will be conducive to walking and biking. The 6th goal is, I think, really important because it is to coordinate across the municipal departments and work with schools and with other nonprofit organizations to do encouragement programs, education programs, and to enforce the safe travel regardless of mode. So that way you have a united front and you are addressing the problem not only by building the infrastructure, but by helping people to see what's possible and to change behaviors. Goal 8, or 7, I guess, loading, parking, and delivery. We already talked about that a little bit. And goal 8 is supporting the development of electric vehicles. Goal 9 is just anticipating all the changes that are constantly upon us. There are emerging trends with autonomous vehicles and other modes, and there's also great technology advancements that might offer solutions that we really haven't even dreamed up yet. So those, that is a sort of a comprehensive approach that covers a wide range, not just walking and biking infrastructure, but policies and programs as well.
Thanks, Annette. Okay, so yeah, this goal, the goal 1 was about improving the downtown, and we've already covered that in the downtown element, so I'll sort of focus on the next goal. So we covered the recommendations for the downtown in the previous element, so going to the next one. So we heard it loud and clear through the polls that roadway safety is a huge priority for residents and through the data analysis of crashes. So we want to make sure that the streets are safe for users of all ages and abilities. Next slide. Some of the recommendations that focus on that goal are, prioritizing engineering improvements for bicycle and pedestrian facilities throughout the village. We have the Central Bergen Bike Path Plan that already that we can build up on to identify locations that should be improved as we as those streets come up for a resurfacing or redesign. Some other ways of addressing the goal for roadway safety is to adopt a traffic calming policy, and what that does is it empowers local stakeholders to make requests that, oh, I see this intersection that is unsafe, and can you assess it, and or a corridor or a segment. And also adopting something that's called a Vision Zero policy, which is a vision for 0 crashes in the village. And so that follows an engineering process. Next slide. And so it's not just about speed, though. When we looked at the crash data, there are other key crash factors like lighting, distracted driving, slow, traffic calming measures that can help improve roadway safety. For example, the 2 images on the side, according to the FHWA, like addressing something like lighting at intersections can reduce crashes by up to 42%. Adding a bike lane can reduce crashes by 30%. So there are proven safety countermeasures, that's what the FHW calls them, that can improve roadway safety. Some of the other recommendations that we had are about installing gateway treatment. So you have these key regional corridors that bring people into Ridgewood, and if you install gateway treatments along at those points, it alerts motorists that they're entering a residential area. They're entering, like you're coming from Route 17 or any of these high-speed roadways, and you're entering an environment that requires you to slow down. Next slide. So the next goal, as Annette mentioned, focuses on advancing the Complete Streets resolution of support that the town has that was passed in 2011. Why Complete Streets? So Complete Streets have a lot of benefits to the community in so many ways. So from public health to sustainability to improving property values and economic revitalization. Every cyclist that comes to downtown spends money. It improves mobility for many users. Not everybody has access to a car. And it sort of tries to make use of a limited right-of-way for a lot of people. Next slide. And so what you would do is you would adopt the recently developed a model policy that NJDOT developed, which is a complete and green streets policy. And it has a higher focus on implementation, green street elements, equity and inclusion, and so that's the next step that you can take to advance the Complete Streets policy. And also, Bergen County is going to be the next county in New Jersey that's going to adopt its own complete streets policy. So sort of coordinating with the county will help advance complete streets in the village. So the next goal focuses, as Annette mentioned, if there is a continuous way to get to your destination, you may choose biking or walking or an alternative mode. You want to make sure that that's safe, it's continuous, it's convenient, it's comfortable for all users. Next slide. And one of the ways that I mentioned in the Q&A is that to develop a complete streets network plan that builds on everything that we've collected so far and the previous plans. And you would coordinate with the county on implementing on some of the county roads. This is because a lot of key corridors in the village are county roads. And it's about coordinating with the county and developing those bicycle and pedestrian facilities, but also developing a neighborhood greenway. Can we go to the next slide? So we already have, I don't know if everyone knows this, there was an Eagle Scout project that has a signed bicycle route that, it's sort of circuitous, and it takes you through near the hospital to Graydon Pool, and I happened to stumble upon it on one of my field visits, and I followed it, and it got me to Graydon Pool, it got me to the downtown, to the train station, to Van Ness Square, and so what a greenway network, neighborhood greenways focus on low stress, low speed, low volume roadways that can connect you to all of your key destinations. So expanding that signed bicycle route into a more, right now it's focused on one part of neighborhood, but the idea would be to expand it to all of Ridgewood. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I forgot to say something. So part of the circulation element is we have identified typologies for different street typologies in Ridgewood, and we would provide design guidance for some of those typologies. So if a road comes up for improvement, the village has some guidance as to what kind of facilities can go on those types of streets.
Encouraging transit, we've already discussed that, so I'm not going to take more time to do it. I want to go to goal 6. I mentioned the coordinate across municipal departments and schools. Programs.
Oh, Annette.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. So, I already kind of explained this when I talked about the goal. So, as far as envisioning what that would look like, imagine that you have a recreation department, and in the parks you teach children how to ride bikes. And if the schools conducted walking school buses or had events and celebrated Walk to School Day on a more than annual basis, that would be a real step forward. I think that you should always think of the infrastructure, the supplement to the infrastructure is really changing behaviors and cultures. So these are important concepts to go with infrastructure improvements. So next. We already talked about loading and curbside management. So goal 8 is supporting the development of the electrical vehicle infrastructure, which is a requirement, and actually in Ridgewood has already passed an ordinance back in August of last year. All municipalities are required to adopt an ordinance to support. And you're going to need an infrastructure plan for where you're going to put the charging stations, for example, and it would be good to look into opportunities to have incentives so that both so that others and the private sector could also have charging stations and be incentivized to do so. Finally, Goal 9 looks ahead. We know that autonomous vehicles are coming. Keep your eyes open for that and all the other innovations that are coming. When it comes to smart technologies, a lot of those smart technologies are only available if you have a small cell system that has 5G. So, and I know it's controversial to many, but in order to have those kinds of systems, big cities can afford it, but it's a good idea if you want to advance something like that to partner with your neighboring communities and to find ways to get that. Because once you have that, you open up a new world of opportunities for things that you can do, everything from real-time parking applications, which may be of interest, to street lighting controls that can save money. So there are advantages, but partnering with others may be necessary. Keeping your eye on those changes and opportunities is certainly something we're going to recommend in the master plan.
So yeah, I did mention these complete street typologies that we identified for the village. So you have downtown village streets, you have regional corridors, which are streets that take you outside of Ridgewood, so Ridgewood Avenue, North Maple Avenue. You have connector streets that sort of connect the residential areas to the regional corridors and to the downtown streets. And then you have local residential neighborhood streets, that is the fourth typology. And then you have off-road trails and connections, so the Saddle River Path, and the Dunham Trail. And I know it's not official, but a lot of people use the PSENG corridor. So that's what would fall under off-road connection. But I do want to make this point, is that not every street needs to have bike lanes and protection, and some streets are fine just the way they are. They may just need like a sign to let people know, like, okay, this is a safe street that you could bike on. So that's what the circulation element will include, like a design guide to help identify ways in which you can add bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So it could focus on sidewalk width. So downtowns, you may have a recommendation for having wider sidewalks. In certain other areas, you might not need 10-foot sidewalk, for example. Having curb extensions, seating in certain locations, lighting. So that's sort of what would be included in the complete street design elements. And with that, this is our second break, 10 minutes.
Thank you. So we have another opportunity to have questions and comments from board members and go from there for a little while.
Okay, does anyone from the board have any questions? And I just want to note for the record, Melanie Hubin joined us at 7:50, just so we have that on the record. Any questions, anyone?
I do. Thanks, John. I just had a quick question. Under the land use element, it said consider eliminating R7 and T zones. I'm not familiar with those. Can you just?
Sure. So the R7 zone is really one small area. It's is the Ridgewood Racquet Club, I think, is basically the extent of the zone, just about, with maybe one or two neighboring properties. I see Mayor wants to chime in.
You're right. You got it.
Okay.
You're in that corner.
So the R7 zone calls for residential development, but the properties are very much commercial in nature. So they, from my look at things, they seem well established as non-residential uses. So it doesn't really make sense for them to be in a residential zone necessarily. So it may make sense to rezone those. The T zone is a transition zone that is basically one or two properties at a lot of different points where business zones meet residential zones. It may make sense to keep it, but it's also unusual in a lot of ways. There's always going to be some transition when two zones meet each other, and it may be that those properties in the T zones lend themselves to one zone or the other, and then some buffering or landscaping standards to separate all residential and non-residential uses, which you have to a certain extent already. But rather than have those parcels, one here, one there in this T zone, it may make sense to dissolve that into the neighboring zone. But it may warrant a little further investigation by the village's planner, who is very familiar with those land use considerations.
And then, can you just go back to the last slide before this? It went by so quickly. Okay, yeah, that one. So, frontage zone, minimum 2 feet. 2 feet for, like, a table and a... Yeah. That seems like a very small amount.
It's
Like,
this
confused.
is an example of how, what are the different sort of zones that you would consider when you are, planning for a sidewalk in a downtown area. So the frontage zone is really what the storefront includes. And then you need to have a clear path for the pedestrians, which would be 5 feet, and then the planted buffer and furnishing. So that's the minimum. It doesn't necessarily mean that you would put a table and chair there, but you could have a bench, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
John, I had a quick question I wanted to ask you regarding the green infrastructure, regarding the flooding. That's one of the big concerns for a lot of residents of Ridgewood. I just wanted to find out how we can get Bergen County or state governments more involved in formulating a way to doing studies regarding how to avoid flooding. Not just in Ridgewood, obviously, that would involve many different towns in the area, but to really move and get more state, federal government involved. Because I feel like for something like that, Ridgewood it by itself can really not do much.
Oh,
All right,
just
just-
speak more into the mic.
Oh,
Igor.
my apologies. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, no. My apologies. My apologies. I just wanted to find out about the green infrastructure for the flooding purposes. I know flooding is a major issue. Every time we have a hurricane or anything like that, a lot of people get affected by it. So I just wanted to find out how and what we can do to get more state, federal, or Bergen County governments involved. What is it that we should do to really go that route? Because just Ridgewood itself cannot really do anything to solve the problem, financially wise and many other ways. So just wanted to find out.
Yeah, so there are obviously there are small scale things that the village can do on its own, and then there may be kind of medium-sized things that the village can do with a lot of funding help from outside. But as you say, it's a watershed-based regional issue where everything that happens upstream affects what's going on downstream. There could be, I know that there's an example of in Rahway, the Rahway River. There's a group of towns that have gotten together as a coalition to try and kind of collectively throw their might behind getting the government's higher levels attention, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, working with the state and federal governments. I don't know to the extent that that idea has been looked into with some of the communities along the Saddle River, along the Hohokus Brook. And it's a big watershed because it all ultimately drains into the Passaic, so it's huge. So that kind of collaboration between municipalities to collectively have their voices heard, I think, is one step. Unfortunately, the way things are in terms of optics, public relations, you get attention after something bad has happened often. So the response efforts need to be more proactive at the state level, and they are. They are becoming more proactive. The state's adopted a lot of different plans and documents over the last year or two in looking at climate change, looking at broader measures to improve resiliency. There's much more stringent stormwater management and there's a new flood hazard model ordinance that the state's come out with. The village is up to date on those things. So the state's continuing to push. It's about the village doing what it can to push, banding with its neighbors to push, and then taking advantage of funding opportunities when they're available, I think is where we find ourselves at the moment.
Okay, any other questions?
I have two questions, actually. The first one is, in terms of the T-zone, the transition zone, you don't feel that even with the limited area of the T-zone, that it serves a purpose? Now, years ago, I served on the Board of Adjustment, and we had a number of applications at the time that were specific to the T-zone, and I see the chairman of the Board of Adjustment is sitting here, and he's shaking his head yes, if I see that correctly. And what we found was always that the T-zone buffered the residential area from the more commercial business areas. But do you feel if not eliminating, should it then be expanded? Is there something that could or should be done to protect the residential, and I know I used the term earlier, the residential neighborhoods in the tree streets? So is there something that should be expanded on?
So that's the way I see it is from a zoning and land use perspective. It's unusual to have one or two parcels kind of off by themselves in a zone. Mm-hmm. That's what drew my attention when I was looking through everything as part of our analysis. If it's working the way the village intended to, then I'm not going to insist that you find some way to change it.
No, I got it.
But it may make sense to expand it if it's also, if there's another tool going along with it. So if we're talking about appropriate locations for some of these pilot ideas about expanding some residential opportunities, maybe an expanded T-zone is that transitional area between the real single family and the heart of downtown, where you have an expanded transitional area that may have some flexibility. Maybe that could be an approach, or something along those lines where it's a block rather than a lot. It's something that, because just the individual lots on their own are a little odd from a zoning standpoint. That's the.
So just worth examining, taking a look at it and see how to better address that area. Would that be fair?
Right.
Then the other question, I had reviewed the visioning document earlier, and I find it interesting that for all the conversation we've had about circulation, pedestrians, vehicular traffic, bicycling, and we also talked about aging in place, all of that, there was nothing in any of the documentation or recommendations that sought to expand upon access for those with mobility issues. Like, I don't think we have a parking space, a handicap accessible parking space. So did that ever come up in any of the documents or anything?
Which location are you talking about for?
Anywhere in the circulation, in any of the downtown, the circulation element, any of it that address those needs or future needs for handicap accessibility, because I don't think we have, we have very few handicap parking spaces downtown. They're limited, I believe, to the train station area. I don't know if anyone.
There is a requirement to have certain number of handicap parking spaces in parking lots and
right.
station areas.
Yeah, and I'm talking more along the regular street parking. Right, I'm just asking if it ever, in any of these conversations, anywhere in the visioning document, was that ever something that even came up?
Not in the conversations that I had, but handicap accessible parking spaces should be included as part of the plan.
Yeah,
and especially in public spaces.
Especially since we've talked so much about, the aging in place and seniors and
Yeah.
so many different things that would actually impact that. I just wondered if it
Yeah, no,
was
that's
anything.
a good point. We can highlight that in the
Thank you.
recommendations. Thank
I
you.
think the visioning did have something on mobility for pedestrians and making it easier for all abilities.
Right,
I
but-
think-
But in terms of walkability, you mean?
Yeah.
But what about just, I mean, I know we talk about reducing vehicular traffic, but it's kind of hard when you know that some people, that's their only way
Yeah.
to get out and about. So I wonder if it's something we should just make a note that that's something in our documents we should seriously be looking at. If doable, I know it's hard sometimes, but anyway, that was it for me.
Okay, anyone else from the board? Or professionals have any questions? Okay, the public, anyone that wants to ask a question or provide a comment can come up to the lectern, state your name and address.
Pamela Perrin, 123 Kenilworth Road. Was any thought given to sort of a mass transit within the village to bring people to downtown and back home? Like a jitney. I've heard of some towns have that.
Yes, as part of the circulation element recommendation, we did look at, we do recommend that the village have a jitney that can get people, that can get residents during peak hours to the train station and to the downtown. And a lot of towns like Maplewood, South Orange have had that, and it has been very successful in reducing car dependency to the train station.
Joe Ferranti, 610 Hillcrest Road, Ridgewood. Transportation is one of the primary sources for emissions and air pollution. But for the electric vehicle portion of what you described, did you give consideration to environmental impact of these various options? Was that part of your discussion? Was it part of the mix? And if not, is it something that we could use?
Joe, I don't think we're
just
hearing
speak right
you.
into
Is
the
it
mic.
something that we could use to inform the public how these various options could be weighted? Because air pollution impact is a significant one, and these various transportation options have various impact levels. Is that something that is worth considering as a part of your analysis?
So the master plan itself does not include a specific environmental impact assessment of any option. That may be part of a study at a later date. But I think the common thread with a lot of these recommendations is to encourage modes that are apart from single occupancy vehicles or private vehicles, biking, pedestrians. You know, we're not going to turn around tomorrow and get rid of cars, but as we've kind of said up front, the cars take up a lot of space. They have their space. They kind of have primacy in a lot of people's day-to-day lives in terms of how they get around, because there aren't a lot of choices in certain areas, and there aren't options. So we're trying to create more of a balance where each street that becomes safer for bikes and pedestrians will hopefully reduce a few vehicle trips, and in doing so have environmental benefits. In terms of the localized emissions, obviously a lot of that's related to vehicles. As we see more and more of the fleet being electrified, if you watch the Super Bowl, you'll see that pretty much every car commercial now is an electric vehicle commercial. So that's the trend. That's where we're headed globally, if not, nationally, if not globally. So there'll be reduction in emissions. There may be other impacts in the big picture, but the idea of a jitney service where you can divert some of those short vehicle trips that come from home to the train, home to the bus, where you can hop on, you get 10 people on a jitney instead of 10 people in their own cars, well, that's got an environmental benefit. So there's no specific study. We can't quantify a specific number of tons of carbon dioxide that are going to be avoided at this point, but I think the common thread here is moving toward a more sustainable transportation system overall.
One other thing is, I think that education and encouragement includes educating people about the the impacts on air quality and the disease that comes from that. I mean, that is part of the, not the infrastructure, but looking at the impacts and getting people to understand that it really does make a difference not only to the individual, but to the community, to the health of the community. Those statistics are really alarming about air quality and asthma incidents in schools. So I think that there is a place for encouraging that kind of information. We can definitely give a nod to that with that recommendation.
Thank you, Annette. We get one more for now, and then we'll move on, and we'll have time at the end for plenty more.
Again, Rorik Holloway, 1 Franklin Avenue. As some of you know, I've been rather skeptical of the whole process so far. I must admit I was very, very impressed by this presentation on the circulation element. Very, very impressed. This is what I'd like to see more of, where you guys have really done some good thinking. It really describes a Ridgewood I'd love to see. And the big challenge is, will Ridgewood find its Robert Moses who would do that? This is what you need. You don't need just people talking about it, people doing something about it. But anyway, I want to compliment this lady for the presentation. I thought it was just terrific. And to give the devil his due, as they say. Now, one of the things that was discussed, maybe mentioned at least 30 times, was bicycling. I'm too old to bicycle in town. In fact, I love walking in Ridgewood, but it's getting to the point where I take my life in my own hands when I do walk around Ridgewood. But when it comes to bicycling, what is sad is to start the right way. We have one bicycle path in Ridgewood, and that has been all but paved over. The question becomes, what will the village do? That's, you know what I'm talking about.
Just say one more time, Rorik, just that.
The bicycle path we have going underneath a trestle
Right.
has all but been paved over. The question is, should something be done to restore it? Because I'm a big believer in bicycling, etc. But anyway, I want to compliment you for a tremendous effort as far as the circulation element. Really good presentation, thank you. But let's find Robert Moses, whoever it is.
So,
Okay, so we have a few more sections that we're going to discuss, and I think we had a fairly nice segue into our sustainability and green building element with the gentleman's question about air quality. So this section has a number of goals, as they all do. Develop green building standards to ensure that new construction is essentially to a higher level than what the bare minimum may be required. This is something that some towns have adopted in their ordinance with a checklist of different elements, and based on some of the rating systems that are out there that I'll talk a little bit about, considering the principles of sustainability in all investment decisions. Is this any time that funds are going to be expended on something, those thoughts should be part of the decision-making process in terms of how, is this looking forward? Is this something that is going to be sustainable? Expanding renewable energy facilities as much as possible. And we have some solar around town. We have solar on some of the public buildings. It's hard when you have tree canopy, but looking at some other alternatives that are renewable as different technologies come out, and things like ground source heat pumps for homes for heating and ventilation. Electrification of the village's vehicle fleet over time as we're buying new vehicles at this point. Like we talked about, they should be starting to phase in electric vehicles sooner rather than later. Enhancing local air quality, both inside and outside. Indoor air quality is a major issue as well. So making sure that buildings are designed to have good indoor air quality, something that's come to our attention through the pandemic, of course. Continuing to incorporate green infrastructure and enhance stormwater management, that's tied in with the land use element that we talked about. Reducing solid waste, diverting as much as possible away from landfills, so expanding on recycling efforts and things like the pilot food scrap recycling program. McKinley will talk a little bit about that more in a moment. Promoting water conservation. The water conservation is going to become more and more of a critical issue as we move forward. In some parts of the country, it is the critical issue, so we have to continue to not take for granted our water resources. Just generally protecting the natural resources that remain. The village is largely built out, but there are some areas of great beauty, and making sure that those natural places maintain that beauty and their quality. Creating a healthy community, healthy and safe community for everyone, plays into some of the transportation things we've talked about, but also some of these environmental factors in terms of the built environment. Again, in giving people opportunities for recreation, exercise, socialization, and general well-being. And then in terms of sustainability, it ties back down to the downtown, the economic development part of things, and making sure that there are local businesses and a sustainable local economy. This was just a brief summary of one of our poll questions in terms of which issues are most important, and largely they're all relatively important, with minimizing waste, energy conservation, and water conservation being the top things that the respondents identified as important in their day-to-day lives. I mentioned the green building standards, the green building checklist. There are different rating systems. There's LEED, which is the most common, popular one for buildings and sites. There's Passive House, which is something that's a little more common in Europe, but has starting to take off a little bit in this country, that looks at using natural systems to heat and cool buildings in passive ways rather than with a lot of engineered mechanical systems. Along with that is the concept of net zero ready or zero ready. Net zero is the idea that a building produces as much energy as it uses, whether it's using renewable energy like solar panels, offsetting the consumption of the building. And the net zero ready idea is that the structure is designed in such a way that it can support renewable energy and has relatively low energy usage, so that it can be easily offset. Some of the other things that we look at are location and transportation. So, when you're less reliant on vehicles, it's generally a more sustainable development. Sustainable sites, the reuse of properties that have previously been developed. You're taking existing asphalt or impervious surface and redeveloping it, rather than covering a green field that has yet to be developed that's more sustainable. Water efficiency we talked about, that can be done through different building systems, and inside and out. So looking at irrigation, minimizing the need for irrigation on properties, limiting irrigation, appliances and other systems within the building that reduce water consumption and promote recycling water. Energy and atmosphere, so some of the passive house techniques I talked about, using the sun for heating, using shading for cooling, materials and resources, using locally produced materials, recycled materials as much as possible. There are some precast kind of materials that have environmental benefits to their use. And then promoting indoor environmental air quality, having good ventilation so that you don't end up with mold, those kinds of things. And there may be in addition to a set of standards and a checklist, there may be a way to incentivize through certain zoning relief some of these things. That'll be a balance that needs to be looked into as the specific standards are developed. Some other practice areas, we've talked about renewable energy, the generation and conservation. Battery technology is advancing rapidly. A lot of that's associated with electric vehicles, but there are systems that you can have solar on during the day, battery storage, and then power your home, at least to a point, with batteries in the evening. So those technologies are going to continue to expand. The ground source heat pumps I talked about, that's using network of underground pipes as part of your heating, ventilation, and cooling system, where the ground being cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter underground, there may be opportunities to employ some of those systems. And then different stormwater management and flooding techniques that we talked about in the context of resiliency. Waste management, McKinley's going to talk a little bit about that in the forthcoming sections, but just promoting as many different opportunities to reuse, recycle, divert, and generally there's an educational and behavioral component where we're using products that waste less. We're already moving toward that with plastic bag bans, things like that, and there's going to be statewide mandate to eliminate certain styrofoam packaging materials. So continuing those trends locally that are happening broadly. And then like I said, I talked about natural resources and water conservation, and there's a lot of specific things that may end up as recommendations, but these are the broad practice areas and the things that we're trying to promote throughout the village and all the different elements of the master plan. That I'll pass it along to McKinley.
Thanks everyone for sticking with us. It's about an hour from my bedtime, so I appreciate you guys being here and being alert. I am an early to bed kind of person. I'm going to walk us through the last 4 elements, and then we'll have more opportunities for conversation. So our community facilities element, we have 5 central goals associated with it. Providing high-quality, cost-effective community facilities that are going to continue to serve not only the existing population, but visitors coming to Ridgewood, as well as your future population moving in. Ensuring that any expansion accounts for all of the needs of that existing and future growth. Promoting the use of sustainable building and site design, everything John just spoke about, those green building design features can be integrated into all of the facilities that serve the community. Goal 4 speaks of maintaining and upgrading facilities, specifically ways in which we can get critical facilities out of the floodplain, so that when the next big storm comes, as we all know it's going to, there's not a delay in services, there's not an inability to get to those life-saving vehicles or equipment, getting what we need out of the floodplain. And goal 5, facilitating coordination between all of these. There's a lot of, I'm speaking emergency services, but also we have the library, the community center. You guys have a plethora of wonderful community facilities here. So making sure that they're all speaking with each other so that the information is getting out. Duplication of resources is often a viable outlet for people, especially when it comes to opportunities for the senior population. There's a bunch of different community organizations, and making sure that they're all speaking together and that there is information available at multiple venues so that people don't have to search the web to find the information they're looking for. So the three main topics of the recommendations, and I apologize for the text, it's easier to see close up, so I will speak them through. One of the main issues or challenges I should say, that we came across when we were speaking with the police, the fire, the emergency services was the lack of space associated with their physical building facilities. They all need more space for storage, they need space out of the floodplain, and it really seems that the buildings themselves are growing out of date for the needs of the village. So what we're recommending is a architectural or engineering study of all of the building facilities. Specifically, we're calling out fire, police, and emergency services, but really this could go for all village community facilities to determine where there are efficiencies, where upgrades are needed to buildings, or where completely new buildings might be the most appropriate outlets. We're hearing that an annex building for the fire headquarters would really be helpful to them, as their fire headquarters are within the floodplain, and they have a storage problem, but because they're in the floodplain, they cannot expand their existing building. An entirely new building might not be feasible, but an annex located somewhere else in the village outside of the floodplain might provide them with just what they need. So a needs assessment and a feasibility study of all of the physical buildings to determine where changes are needed, relocations, et cetera. And broadly speaking, continuing the programs at the senior center, the youth center, the community center, all of those, of course, are located within this building. It seems to us that the community center and its website should really function as a one-stop shop for all of the various, especially the volunteer organizations throughout the community that may not have the resources to establish their own website or get out their own brochures and informational material, using the community center as that central location, and their website especially. Making sure that that website is updated and that the calendar is working. When we were looking into what current events and opportunities are available, it doesn't appear that that calendar is either being updated or is functioning at all. So making sure that that is updated so everyone in the community has a place to go for information about what's happening in the village. Additionally, making sure that there's coordination between the senior and the youth components of the community center. Mentor programs between the senior and the youth programs, ensuring that there's interconnection so that they're not just separate entities functioning in the same space. And as we continue to move hopefully beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, and as these new developments in town come online, monitoring the enrollment of the public school system. As of right now, the school buildings do not have a capacity issue. In fact, this last year, there was the enrollment went down, and that is completely due to COVID. All of the reduction in enrollment had to do at the kindergarten and pre-K level, where a lot of parents just chose not to enroll their students or their children because it didn't make sense given the constraints of the pandemic. So as we come out of the pandemic, monitoring to see if that's going to be a continuing trend, if parents are just going to wait till first grade now to enroll their students, or if the village will get back on track, and as the village grows, where we need to expand those educational facilities. So moving on to the recycling element, we have 3 goals associated with this element. Broadly speaking, just increasing the recycling efforts throughout the town. Yes, I'm sorry, okay. I will project my voice a little more. So increasing the recycling efforts throughout the village, expanding the educational material and information that is out there, giving residents hard data about the recycling efforts, where your recyclable material is going, what's happening with it, and growing the village's composting and food scraps program. So the village in 2018, which is the most recent set of data, you guys recycled 15,500 tons of material, which represents 49% of your overall municipal solid waste. That's really impressive, and we've looked at communities across the state. You guys are really high up there with your recycling, so you're already doing a fantastic job. You are 1 percentage point away from meeting the state's goal. The state has a goal of recycling 50% of all municipal solid waste streams. So you are really right there. You really have an incredible recycling program already in place. So there's just a few recommendations we have to enhance that. That would be implementing smart recycling measures that can track the village's recycling process. John touched on this a little bit, but there are, when I say smart, I mean technology smart. There are now recycling containers that can account for how much is put into them. They're usually a little bit bigger in terms of capacity. And all of that data can go back to the village, to the DPW, to determine this recycling container on this part of town is always full. It's always full within the first couple hours. We need some more over here. This one maybe isn't being used as much. Maybe we should redistribute those resources elsewhere. It can provide additional data to make further recommendations and changes and improve the program. Working towards the goal of a 1-to-1 ratio for waste containers and recycling containers. This came up in the feedback of some of our polls, where in the downtown especially, there's seems to be plenty of refuse of garbage containers, but there's not always a recycling container located in the immediate vicinity. And if I don't have a data representation of it, but most of the time, if someone doesn't see a recycling container, they're not going to recycle. It's either going to end up on the ground or in the garbage can. So moving towards recycling, garbage right next to each other, especially in the downtown. Promoting the cut it and leave it lawn care mentality. So what this means, it's a program that's nothing that the village government can really do, but it's a educational program and it's a change of mindset for homeowners, and it's endorsed by the DEP. It's the process of cutting your grass more often, leaving it higher, and then allowing the grass clippings to fall to the ground. That reduces the need for fertilizer and increases the nutrients in the soil and reduces runoff. So there's multiple benefits to doing that. So promoting that process, putting the educational material out there, and of course that reduces the amount of lawn pickup that the village has to account for. And that goes hand in hand with expanding on the food scrap recycling pilot program that the village initiated last year. I believe they are in the process of analyzing the data from that program to determine where and how it was successful. 100 homes received food scrap recycling containers that they were to collect their food scraps and then bring them to the compost facility. So determining what was successful in that, seeing how we can expand, especially to the non-residential sections, the downtown businesses that are going to produce way more waste than your typical single or two-family home. And finally, to really sum it up, expanding educational resources and capitalizing on your existing opportunities, the library, the school, the community center. Ridgewood High School has the Youth Environmental Council. I've already found a few articles they've written about composting. So we find that the biggest hindrance to composting and recycling is that people they just don't know, especially composting. They don't know how to start doing it. They don't even know that it's, in the village's case, people might not be aware that it's even an option. So working with the various existing community facilities out there to expand that education. The utilities element, we have 3 goals. Planning for the provision of adequate and cost-effective utility systems, ensuring sufficient capacity with growing demands for both residential and businesses, and promoting the reduction of energy consumption and providing for the utilization of energy-efficient design standards. Again, it all ties back together. The elements are very much interconnected. So the village's sanitary sewer pipes are quite old. Many of them are over 80 years old and are reaching their life capacity. This is causing problems with what's called inflow and infiltration issues. So because they're old, they are leaky, there are cracks, there's additional groundwater that is coming into the pipes when they are not designed to handle that capacity. This could also come from manholes that are disintegrating or basement sump pumps that are leaking water into the pipes. All of that increases the flow that these systems are not designed for. So not only are they old, but now they have more flow going through them that they simply cannot handle. So monitoring the situation with that and creating a reduction plan that establishes an action plan. So studying where the issues are. Is it a leaky manhole? Is it groundwater seeping in? Is it all of the above? And developing a plan moving forward for so that there isn't a catastrophic event when something is going to burst. This would also analyze whether replacing pipes are the right option or there are other less expensive and less disruptive processes than replacing whole pipe systems. Encouraging or even requiring green infrastructure for new development. Again, this has been spoken about. The DEP already has more intensive standards now for new development with green infrastructure. And with that comes monitoring the existing solar installations that the village already has, putting that information out there for the public to see and learn about what are these solar panels collecting, what are they doing, and are there other options in the village for appropriate locations for more of them. Implementing Wi-Fi hotspots in public places. There is already some of this. As soon as you pull into the parking lot here, your phone progs you to connect, and it's great. So moving that towards other public spaces such as Van Ness Park or the bus station. The smart recycling containers we were talking about often come with Wi-Fi hotspots built in with a 200-foot radius. So providing that service to the village residents and visitors. And the final one is working with Ridgewood Water to identify water supply demand for future build-outs. And really, this expands beyond Ridgewood Water. It's really all utilities. We've been talking a lot about electric vehicle charging stations. Well, the power for those needs to come from somewhere. So as the trends continue to move in the direction that they are, making sure that we are coordinating with all of the various players in the game so that we don't miss anything. And finally, we have the historic preservation element. This element is not being developed by either of our offices, but is being developed by the village's Historic Preservation Commission, led by your planning board member, Diane O'Brien, over here. You're also very lucky to have her. She's incredibly qualified for this. She's a historic resources specialist. So she's leading the way with this. So I will represent what they have put together so far, and if anyone has any questions, Diane will be available to help. So goal 1 is promoting the long-stand policies, preserving the historic assets. Goal 2 is preserving and reinforcing the historic features that make the village special. Helping direct change so that modifications will enhance the character of the village. Encouraging repair rather than replacement. Discouraging demolitions of historic properties where feasible. And promoting education about the heritage of the village. So the recommendations that the HPC has come up with include revising the boundaries of the districts. And this has to do with some areas there's been homes that were torn down, so those no longer would qualify. And in other areas, there were assets that seemingly were maybe just skipped over the last time. The historic preservation element has not been updated since the 90s, so it could be that something just wasn't recognized back then. And they have come up with a list of recommended properties to include in various, or disclude of various districts. Nominate additional properties to the state or national registers. The HPC has come up with a list for this as well. It includes buildings like the high school that would potentially qualify for the state or national registers. Developing an interactive map of the villages on the village's website. So this way anybody could go in and take a look at the village's history. It would also lead to great ways to establish self-guided walking tours of the village's key historic landmarks, something that's accessible to everybody. Increasing the communication between the building department, the planning and zoning board, and the HPC itself. So the HPC right now does not know when applications come in that are in a historic district. So by increasing communications, they will better understand the types of buildings that are coming in for development, addition, demolition, ensuring that all the teams are working together. Exploring the possibility of expanding the Village Center Historic District zoning ordinance to include residential historic properties. So right now, the HPC reviews buildings in the downtown historic district that are coming in for building permits. They do not review any residential homes. So expanding the possibility of providing them with the opportunity to review those historic residential homes. This plays into making sure there's communication happening across all parties. It's not to say that the HPC they couldn't prohibit a homeowner from making changes, but working with them to say, hey, maybe, have you thought of X, Y, Z? Have you considered doing this instead of that to help maintain the character? Investigating the feasibility of a demolition delay ordinance. What this does is anybody who is proposing to demolish a home or a structure or a bridge or a site that's in a historic district, it asks them to wait a few, depending, some municipalities do 30 days, some do 90 days. That would need to be studied what the appropriate amount of time would be, but it allows them to come to the HPC, to the village, to talk about what they want to do and see if there's any ways that if they can't help and they have to demolish, what could they do with the new building that they're putting in to help bring back some of that historic character that might be lost. Promoting the rehabilitation of historic properties, again, rather than demolishing them. And considering allowing the change of use in historic structures. Historic structures, especially residences, are often very large and sometimes very expensive for an individual homeowner to keep up. So when a historic structure sits vacant, some communities have allowed them to change to very specific non-residential uses that would be context appropriate for the area, such as maybe a bed and breakfast or a small boutique hotel. A private capital that would have the the financing to restore and save the home. And finally, again, what ties into all of this is developing educational opportunities. Change doesn't happen if people don't know what the options are, and providing people with those resources to help them move forward is really critical. And with that, that is it. Thank you. Most of you are left. I think we have a few minutes for additional comments and questions. I'm going to let John take control of that.
Thanks.
Okay,
So,
the board have any questions on any of the issues that were just covered?
Yeah, I actually have one. I'm just looking for a slide here. Let me just find it. It's here. Sorry, gang.
You're upset
All
we didn't meet that recycling benchmark
No, it's
there?
driving me well, actually, so the 49% of the village's municipal solid waste, but I realize that it's 2018. It's possible we're past the 50%.
It is, and I wish that they would come out with the data faster. If you gave us more time, we could get to the 2019 data, but unfortunately, this is the most recent year. So it is quite possible that through your efforts, you have already exceeded.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. It was really just.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely
I have all these
right.
notes on here. We can do it. We can meet this goal. And
it was a pandemic. Maybe people got bored and got better at recycling. You know, there's.
Yeah, no, I think Ridgewood is really good at recycling.
You
know, I think
absolutely are.
we do a good
So,
job.
and even in 2018, you were far ahead of most municipalities in Bergen County and the state. So absolutely.
Good, thank you. Put my mind at ease for a minute here.
Yeah.
And I did have another question. I just have a point of clarification, I think, that the Historic Preservation Commission sees residential structures, historic structures, when they're seeking a variance relief. So it's the only time, but I think that it is possible, and I note that we have a investigate a demolition delay ordinance. Are you familiar with any such ordinance, or maybe I should direct that to council? But go ahead.
I serve on the board of a town in Morris County called Harding Township, and they have a very active HPC and a demolition delay ordinance. Their delay period is 90 days, and what they do is they ask if somebody with a locally designated historic home if they're going to demolish the home, to come in and speak to the HPC and go over what they're doing, why they're doing it, if there's any way they could save the home or parts of the home, or if they can't save it, can they document it, and would they donate those photos to the village? It gives the HPC, they're a township, I'm sorry, but it gives the HPC and the town an option to either try to save anything or at least preserve it for posterity in terms of photographing and documenting.
Okay. And then I just had two other things. I wanted to acknowledge Diane O'Brien because she has just made this incredible, monumental effort, and it's her work. I mean, all of you have done an amazing job, but as a member of the planning board and just a resident and a highly qualified member, I mean, she's just really done an amazing job, so thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And just to expand on that, she has walked around and taken photos of every single historic house in the village. So.
It's an amazing, amazing amount of work. And before I let anyone continue, I just wanted to point out that we have members of almost every board and committee present tonight. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. I see my HPC people out there, and we have Board of Adjustment, we have Shade Tree, Green Ridgewood, we have everybody here, so thank you. And CSAC, right? Yeah.
Citizen safety.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, any professionals have any questions, comments? Anyone from the public?
Hello, David Refkin, 401 Westina Terrace, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the Green Ridgewood Committee, which I'm a member of. So in an effort to ensure that issues related to resiliency planning and sustainability concerns are appropriately addressed in the master plan, and having considered pertinent state statute, including relatively recently passed laws, we ask that the resiliency and sustainability element of the new master plan address the following. Public health and safety. Given that extreme weather events are increasing in frequency and severity, A hazard vulnerability assessment would indicate that more attention should be focused towards the impacts on public health and safety. Recent incidents of extreme and extended heat waves, extreme cold weather, including weather more than 40 degrees from normal, more frequent flooding events here in Ridgewood, and windstorms combined with power failures represent a real danger to public health and safety, especially for the elderly and those with health conditions. Second, frequency and severity of extreme weather events. This reality will impact and overload the capacity of the village's infrastructure. When the updated master plan is written, the additional increasing frequency and severity of storms in the future should be taken into account with appropriate planning spelled out. Third, coordination with state, county, and federal organizations. There will be an increased need to coordinate resiliency plans. The master plan should consider how these efforts can be handled seamlessly to protect public health and safety. 4, improve communications and coordination with PSE&G. The village should communicate the master plan strategy to PSE&G and coordinate with a PSE&G representative who interacts on a regular basis with the village staff. We should improve the resiliency of the power grid in Ridgewood with special attention given to our very vulnerable overhead wires, which I personally have experienced. Number 5, water mains, stormwater, and sewage lines are inadequate and outdated. We anticipate the master plan will address these concerns in the utilities element, and it was good to hear that that was mentioned earlier. 6, consideration of floodplain acquisition and related actions. The village is quite vulnerable to heavy precipitation, as we know this building. There are numerous items that are worth considering, including purchasing homes, strategies to develop a water control system to minimize the severe damage caused by Hohokus Brook, as well as looking at permeable roads, driveways, etc. And I know that was mentioned too. So in conclusion, we would encourage the master planning process to address anticipated climate change in the next decade and beyond, as well as the impact that will have on the citizens of Ridgewood, with emphasis on public health and safety. And thank you for the opportunity to provide our input, and the committee thanks you for this chance. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, anyone else?
Carolyn Jacoby, 160 Godwin Avenue. Just get this, you can hear me. John, thank you so much for including the Shade Tree Commission's community forestry plan, and there is such a wonderful focus in so many areas regarding green infrastructure. And I want to thank the mayor, the council members who are here, who are in fact now considering a revised tree ordinance that will do exactly what you have talked about. So it's not that we are only looking at the future, we're looking now to do things. And it will have a tremendous impact. Thank you for that. And also for the planning board, the importance of communication and everybody knowing what everybody else is doing is really very, very important regarding the historic preservation, being able to work with the planning board. And I would like to put that forth for the Shade Tree Commission to be able to communicate with the planning board anything that will affect the green infrastructure, and to look at that as part of the totality of the plans. We would love to come and do a presentation for the planning board, or an opportunity just to be a resource for you. So I'm putting that out. Thank you all. This was terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you guys, really.
Thank you.
Sheila Brogan, 302 Kensington Drive. Could I go back to land use, or is?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to, two things. One is support for universal design. Can those elements be put into a master plan where there is a real request to do in new housing or rehab to look at universal design elements? That's one. And two is about the auxiliary dwelling units. Do you have information on towns that have successfully changed their zoning requirements to allow for that?
So to your first question, yes, we can include standards. We could recommend the inclusion of standards, I should say. To your second question, to my knowledge, Princeton and Maplewood are two towns that have adopted accessory dwelling unit ordinances. In fact, I'm going to zoom back because there is a picture way back somewhere. There we go. So the bottom pictures here are actually an example of an accessory. It's a building that was developed as an accessory dwelling unit, with an accessory dwelling unit, I should say, in Princeton. Front and back of the building. In that case, the accessory dwelling unit is attached to the building. It's within. There are a lot of different potential forms, and I think context is important. So understanding kind of intensity, density, context in terms of what may work in different places. I know that the Maplewood example, there are limitations on the size of an accessory dwelling unit. There are, I think you have to have a certain minimum lot size, so it's not, if your lot's already undersized, it wouldn't be appropriate to add additional dwelling space on that property. So it's something that would warrant a lot of investigation, looking at best practices from other places, probably even communication with some of those other elected officials or professionals from those municipalities. I know in our little planning world where we go around to conferences and hear presentations about different things, it's been a relatively hot topic recently, and and council people from both Princeton and Maplewood have participated in some of those discussions, and I think they're generally very happy to share their experiences. So if it's something that the village wants to pursue, I think there are resources that are out there to talk about what others have gone through and some of the trial and error and pluses and minuses. So there'll be an educational process if it's something that you go down that line, and I think it'll be about understanding the context is the most important thing.
Yeah, Hans-Jürgen Lehmann, 234 Union Street. I was a little taken aback at the beginning when you talked about, or you dismissed high-density housing in the master plan. So to set the record straight, we don't have high-density housing in Ridgewood. We have multifamily housing, okay? And the multifamily housing has been built on repurposed commercial properties and has become, I think, a considerable success and rather vital to the success of the downtown area, okay? So why you would dismiss it out of hand, I don't get, okay? Secondly, unless I missed it, I didn't hear any discussion about affordable housing for the elderly, nor affordable housing for people who are physically and mentally challenged. Is that something that is just not being considered, or?
It's on the slide you have up, right? Right there at the bottom? It's on this slide.
Yeah, the slide does include a recommendation for different housing types for people of all different abilities and ages. We are not working on the affordable housing element to the master plan. That's something that's been being worked on by another professional in the context of court settlements and all of the things that are going on related to that. So our role here is not to make specific recommendations about affordable housing because others are working on that.
So then to the planning board, is that something that the planning board will consider in its master plan? I mean, it seems like this is a vital part of what happens in this community. Why aren't we discussing it as part of the master plan? I understand some of the other issues that are involved legally. I get all of that. you know? But why wouldn't you incorporate it into the master plan?
Steve, you want to address that from a legal?
So the state determined 30 years ago or so in various two-stage litigations that every town, every municipality in the state of New Jersey must, by law, address affordable housing. And because of that, there has been, I can't even tell you how much litigation there's been over the
Look,
years.
I'm very familiar with Mount Laurel. I get all
Well,
the
let me
stuff
finish
that's
and I'll
happened.
get to
I'm
my
sorry.
point.
Go ahead.
So the bottom line is that every town, every village, every municipality must address it in their master plan, which is also a state mandated activity. So in order to do that, and because there are various legal aspects of it, there is a separate carved out, is probably the best word to use, carved out avenue to address affordable housing. It is being addressed. It's just not being addressed by these folks.
Right.
And it will be addressed in a public manner. You have to understand that there are some legalities involved which have to be addressed first before it gets presented to the public. So it's there, it's coming, and it will be addressed in full public view.
But will it find its way into the master plan, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, by
Eventually.
law, it has to. It has to be addressed
Right.
in the plan, in the master plan. So it's going to be addressed. What the avenue is and what it looks like, I can't tell you. I don't know what that will be, and I don't know if anybody knows what that'll be as of this date.
If I may just briefly add to that. So the master plan, the state law describes it as a set of elements, basically chapters in a book. We're talking about these different elements this evening. The affordable housing element is separate and apart. It's been put off into its own space because of the legal issues associated with it. So once that is adopted, it will be part of the master plan.
Great, and just, if you don't mind, I also like the sort of accessibility pieces that you presented in terms of bicycle lanes and walkability in town and whatnot. And I'm just, you know, for the planning board, I really hope and pray that this finds its way into reality in the village of Ridgewood. You know, we're looking, you know, Mr. Hallaby pointed out that the only recognizable bike path we have in this village is the one that goes around the train station under the trestle, and that bike path is being eradicated at this point. So I don't understand which way we're going to go with this. You know, are we going to be true to our word in the master plan, or are we going to bypass some certain things because we don't like those things? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
Hi, good evening. Mahmoud Hamza, 528 Amsterdam Avenue. I came with a lot of questions, but you addressed them all, so I say thank you. Job very well done. Two things that came to my mind. Ridgewood is a sports town. Did you take that into consideration? You know, you have a lot of people come here in the weekend. How can we redirect them so that they can go to our business district, so that they can do shopping in town, so that they can eat in town? The second issue is Graydon. It's one of the treasures of Ridgewood, so beautiful. We use it 2 months a year about, but fall and spring, it's not being used. Did you consider ideas of how we can make it so that that will attract more people to Ridgewood, and from there they can go to our downtown?
That's an excellent point, and I apologize to everyone because I neglected to mention at the outset, you notice we did not talk about parks and recreation at all this evening. There is another team working on the open space and recreation plan and an environmental resource inventory. We're not able to give you any information yet on their work. I hope that the next time that we're together that we can have them with us to provide all the information about the recommendations that they have for that work. So to your point about Graydon and generally those recreational activities around town, unfortunately we're not directly involved with that. And as far as getting people downtown, part of it is information, both in town and out of town. If you have people coming from other towns already, we know that from speaking to some of the business owners. So it's a popular destination. There's a lot of restaurants that people come in from out of town to go to. Exploring some of those marketing opportunities, whether it's with the existing infrastructure or with a potential improvement district group that is a more formalized thing. Just wayfinding signs so people know where they're going, information that's out there so that people know what's on offer. Let's continue to work on that. Yeah.
I just want to add off of that, one of the recommendations we mentioned but didn't get really involved in is this idea of this marketing and branding the downtown, and we had talked about opportunities to get more of that information on the village's website, including passing out cards to all of the business owners with QR codes so that anybody who's visiting can scan that and see where the parking is, where the bikes are, where the other restaurants in the area, where a hardware store might be. So we have the four of us have worked to come up with other strategies that will get that information out there. So I think it was touched on, but just so you know, we have explored that further than what we talked about tonight.
I just have one more thing I'd like to say. Nancy Brennan Hale, 136 Doremus Avenue, Ridgewood. So there were so many lovely things in this plan, and I'm just wondering if there's any way to identify low-hanging fruit. Like, can we get someplace quicker? Are there things that we could do not that expensively that could be done, with an immediacy? Have you seen any towns that have done that have taken your plan and sort of fine-combed through it to see what they could do with haste?
Yes, that is typically something that is done and something that we intend to do in terms of identifying short-term, medium-term, long-term types of actions. Things that may be within the village's power to accomplish on its own, things where you may need outside help. So understanding kind of the continuum of activity that can come from this and start to prioritize some of those things.
I had actually, I'm sorry, Rorik can go first.
Rorik Holloway, 1 Franklin Avenue. Again, I must admit I was much more impressed with what happened this evening as compared to 3 months ago. But I also see that 2 or 3 big elements of this plan are missing. The question I have for you, Mr. Joel, you owe it to the Ridgewood residents to come up with a plan for the master plan. We keep on getting these meeting here, a meeting there. Does anyone have a vision what it is you're doing, what has been done, what needs to be done, by whom and by when and for how much? Because I can see I won't live long enough with yet another meeting of someone else, Parks and Recs. Okay, the next time, locust housing. Someone has to put it all together, and it's up to you to do it. Okay, let's have a plan for the master plan. It doesn't have to be a 600-page document. It could be a 4 or 5-page document. It has to be an honest document. Okay, but you owe it to us. Otherwise, you are failing in your responsibilities. Thank you.
All right. Just to let everyone know, we have a master plan subcommittee, and it's a group effort, and a lot of time has gone into this whole master plan process. We've had an extensive visioning process that took a long while, and we amassed a ton of information. And then we're on to this process, forming the master plan. So a lot of thought and effort has gone into it, a lot of public participation. We've had a website that's charted through the visioning, everything that was done on a timeline, and also it continues to be done. So if anyone has any questions or needs any information, you just review the website, which will have it. And I understand, some people want it done quicker, some people want more time. So we're trying to strike a balance, but we're getting it done, we're pushing to get it done. And as you can see, there's a lot of different elements that you have in it, so it does take time to get it done, and we want to do it right. So we owe it to the village, and we want to have a great plan that we're proud of, and I think we're on the right track. Okay, any other questions, comments? Sure.
Do you mind if I take my mask off for a minute?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm Barbara Ferranti, 610 Hillcrest Road. I would just like to applaud the master plan. I'm from the Historic Commission in town, and we have to play catch up, and I'm really glad to see that that you have included so many of the bullet points that have to be covered. The state of New Jersey has a historic commission. We have followed pretty much what the state of New Jersey's historic commission guidelines are. But as you know, and I'll abbreviate my feelings on this and my thoughts, we're losing a lot of beautiful architecture in this town. The reason why people have moved here is for the schools, the recreation, and the charm of the town and our downtown. And just in my own neighborhood, in recent memory, we've lost at least 6 homes. And people say, well, they're usually run down and they have to be knocked down. These homes were not run down. This is the only way contractors can make money, because we don't have lots available any longer. We know, we understand they have to make a living, but they knock many times, at least what I see in my neighborhood, a lovely home down and build one twice as expensive, 3 times as expensive. And that's how they make their profit. But we have to hold the flag up. We have to, and I love this stopping demolition for a while, giving us a chance to have a site visit. Very recently, a couple of years ago, Montclair, a sister community of ours, lost a home, a beautiful, large home on a crest that backed up to the Eagle Rock Reservation from 1865. They lost it. They had gone for a site plan, but they never, ever got around to registering it, getting on the New Jersey Register of Historic Places. Gone. Gone with its neighbor, and its neighbor was from 1903. And they are still suffering over it. And what's going in? An enormous 60,000 square foot home. So I appeal to all of you as residents. Let's keep our flag up and try to keep as much of beautiful Ridgewood as we have today. Thank you.
So I just want to add something.
Go
So
ahead.
I actually just wanted to add something to that, and I think it goes not just to Barbara, but also to Hans. And I think, I just want to point out that Hans is a former chairman to the Board of Adjustment, and Sergio is also a former chairman to the Board of Adjustment. I served on the Board of Adjustment. We have the current chairman here. And I think that one of the things that we would all agree, the 4 of us here tonight, would agree that over the years, we've seen so many expansions on very small starter homes and starter first-time home buyer affordable homes knocked down, and to Barbara's point, massive homes built in place, and we have essentially depleted our stock of starter homes. And I think when Hans speaks to that, I think that if I'm wrong, you can correct me. I think that we're not just talking about affordable housing as defined by the law, but I think we're also talking about just the affordability to move into Ridgewood for new families, starter homes, and I think it's actually a point well taken, and I think that both Barbara and Hans kind of drive that point home, so I agree completely, so thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay.
Well, thank you all very much for attending, for your input, for your questions. It's really valuable to us to know when we're on the right track, when we may not be, and to hear from all of you about that. So our next steps, we're going to be posting this presentation on the website, so you can get a closer look at it at your leisure. And we're hoping to be able to share some additional draft documents before too long. I don't have a date to promise you yet. And right now, as of now, our target for our next meeting is April 5th for this project, at which point we'll be hoping to present what is just a refined version of this, a little, maybe an expanded version of this, addressing some of the things that we heard, and moving toward the finish line with the plan. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. All right, we'll go. All right, the next item on the agenda is adoption of minutes, February 1, 2022. Anyone review it and want to make a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay.
Mayor Knudsen?
Did you call my
Yeah.
name? Yes,
Yeah.
I'm good, yes, thank you.
John Young?
Yes.
Councilman Reynolds?
Yes.
Richard Joe?
Yes.
Diane O'Brien?
Yes.
Melanie Huban?
Yes.
Igor Lebarsky?
You guys, I don't know whose name she called. Who?
Igor.
Yes.
It's for the minutes, yeah.
Yes. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, we're just.
Did you get everyone?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. All right.
No, you're good. You did.
We have any other business? Any other business?
Oh, we have
Oh, do we?
something else. Okay.
We have an executive session?
Yes, just
Oh.
real quick.
So it's executive?
All right, do it.
Wait, no.
Yep.
All right, you gotta clear the room.
All right.
Folks, can you move outside, please? Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion to move into executive session?
I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Okay, take the roll on it.
Yeah, sorry. Mayor Knudsen?
Yes.
John Young?
Yes.
Councilman Reynolds?
Yes.
Richard Joe?
Yes?
Diane O'Brien?
Yes.
Melanie Huban?
Yes.
Igor Lebarsky?
Yes.
And Sergio Allegra?
Okay, we're going to move into executive session in a moment.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Dylan.
Good? Yes, it's on Tesco.
Oh.
further business, anybody? Do we have a motion to end the meeting?
Then,
Can we accept all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nope.
All right, we're concluded.
Very
All right,
good.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Back for another 4 hours tomorrow. And another 4 hours
Thursday. Oh my God, we have budget.
meetings back to back.
Oh. Two mics, and Thursday it's pizza.